Well, good day and welcome back to the Johnson Space Center for the next in our series of briefings today on the STS-134 ULF-6 mission to the International Space Station. This briefing is dedicated to the discussion of the Soyuz activities that are on tap for Monday, the upcoming departure of the Expedition 27 crew on the Soyuz TMA-20. And with us today to discuss all of those details are Kenny Todd, the International Space Station Manager for Mission Integration and Operations, and Courtney McMillan, the ISS Team 4 Flight Director, who has been involved in the coordination and preparations for Monday's Soyuz activities. And we'll start off with Kenny.
Thanks very much, Rob. Well, it's great to be here with you today. We're off to a fantastic start for the ULF-6 mission. Yesterday, we were able to accomplish our primary payload objective, which is getting the AMS installed, and by all accounts, the AMS is up and running, and the principal investigators are very excited about what they're seeing so far in terms of data coming back from the payload. In addition to that, this morning, we were able to get EVA-1 behind us, and when you come into a flight like this one where you have 4 EVAs, it's always good to get that first one behind you. We had the problem with the CO2 sensor, but that's something we'll work through. We're not going to need that suit again until EVA-4, so we got a little bit of time to go look into that, as Derek mentioned to you earlier. Back several months ago during the ULF-5 mission, I came and talked to you about what at that time was a very unique configuration for the space station. We had all the partner visiting vehicles present, and we entertained the idea at that time of adding a photo documentation task to that flight and undocking 24 Soyuz off the MRM-2 port, backing away, taking some pictures, doing some documentation work, and then bringing that Soyuz back into that port. For that particular time frame and that particular vehicle, we decided at that time not to step up to that task. Our Russian colleagues had highlighted some concerns they had with deviating from their flight test plan for that particular vehicle, given that it was a new vehicle. And so we accepted their recommendation and did not press that any further for that particular flight. So we fast forward a few months, and here we are with ULF-6 and Space Shuttle Endeavour attached, and now instead of a unique configuration, we have what I term more of a unique opportunity, which was created by the fact that several weeks ago, the space station program, along with the space shuttle program, agreed to enter into what we called a dual docked ops scenario, where while the shuttle was attached, that we would go and undock 25 Soyuz off of the FGB Nadir port. That was a capability that we've been looking at over the last several years and getting comfortable with that point where we felt like we could undock a Soyuz, and so that allowed us to be able to make that decision several weeks ago with an understanding that, as with all things, as you get a little closer to it and understand a little bit more about the mission specifics, you need to finish up, do all the right analysis. But on the whole, we felt good about our capability to go support doing that undock. And this last week, we asked the team, again, to go, as part of looking at this unique opportunity to go do some additional photo documentation of the station with the shuttle attached. We asked them to go review that task to see what it would take to add that in to this dual docked ops scenario where we're undocking the Soyuz. And we've been working with our international partner in the Space Shuttle program to identify all the mission-specific analyses it would take to support backing away, going to a couple of 100 meters with the Soyuz, taking some pictures, and then continuing with the normal undock scenario. The partners have all been working through their own internal processes to perform their analysis and vet the results and come up with their own independent opinions about whether or not we would try to put that task in the 25 Soyuz undock plan. And yesterday, in fact, at the Space Shuttle Mission Management Team meeting, we had a very good discussion about the Space Shuttle role in that overall process for supporting this dual docked ops scenario. And at the conclusion of that, after listening to quite a bit of discussion, again, a lot of very positive discussion about the work that's been done up to this point to allow us to say that the team was comfortable with this approach. Leroy Kane did say, let's go do this, let's go support this objective. And so this morning at our ISS Mission Management Team meeting, during our 25S go, no-go readiness review, which we do for every vehicle that undocks. We do a readiness review to ensure that we've got all the systems work done, that we've done all the right analyses to support the undock. We considered this photo documentation task as part of that overall undock readiness review. We looked at the work remaining. We looked at the risk associated with completing that work. And I'll tell you that it was acceptable from my point of view, and looking at what I thought was a couple of minor tasks to complete, not inconsistent with the type of work that we have to complete right before a Soyuz undock, whether we're in a dual docked op scenario or not. So we as a community, with 100% consensus approved this change to the baseline to go add this photo documentation task as part of the 25S Soyuz undock. And I won't say any more about those particulars. I'll let Courtney talk to you about exactly what we're going to do during the mission.
All right. Well, let's see. So as Kenny said, we knew when Endeavour launched that we would be undocking 25S during the mission. So we knew that was coming. So prior to the mission, we worked on essentially a standard undocking timeline for the Soyuz so that we could get it safely undocked and landed during Endeavour's flight. We had that timeline pretty much ready to go. There were the typical open work items that were being chased down by the flight team. When the opportunity came up this week to redo that timeline, to add the photography in, we started a lot of that work over again with the new proposal, and we've managed to get things very far along this week, and we're in really good shape going into we were in really good shape this morning going into the go, no-go review, as Kenny mentioned. So we decided today to go for this plan. We've got a quick animation that I think will give you an idea of what is happening with the station, if we can bring that up. So on the bottom view, you can see the initial attitude for the undocking. The Soyuz is the yellow object that's now flying away. The upper left view is what the crew will see from the Soyuz of the ISS. So they will back out to about 200 meters. You'll see they're a little bit above the velocity vector behind the station, and that's to keep the sun out of the pilot's eyes. After they get to the station keeping point, a few minutes later, ISS will begin a maneuver, and we should see that kick off here in a minute. And this is a 130-degree maneuver. They'll be moving at 0.2 degrees per second, so it will take about 15 minutes. And it will basically bring the whole stack around so that we get a side view and a really good view of Endeavour. So you can imagine this is a fairly unusual attitude for us to be flying during a maiden mission. There's been a lot of work by a whole lot of teams to make sure that this is really a good thing to be doing. But folks are very comfortable with the plan as we've gotten it so far. So let's see, I'll give you a quick rundown on the timeline. The station crew will wake up at about 5 o'clock a.m. Central Time, so Houston time, that's about 10 o'clock GMT. They'll do their normal undock preparations and packing up the Soyuz to depart. Hatch close is at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. Physical separation is at 4:35 p.m. Central Time. There's a few other things happening prior to that, including maneuvering to the undock attitude that you saw. But separation happens at about 16:35 local Houston, and then we should reach the station keeping point about 7 minutes after that, 6 or 7 minutes after that. And then Paolo's got about 8 minutes to set up and start the imagery. So we're expecting the imagery to start at about 10 till 5 p.m. Houston time, 1650 Houston time. Of course, it may take him a little bit less or more, depending on how efficient he is. ISS will start its maneuver 5 minutes later. As I said, that takes about 15 minutes. And then they're in attitude for about 5 minutes before the Soyuz set burn is scheduled to take Soyuz away from ISS and ready to get back into preparing for descent. So that set burn occurs at 5:15 p.m. Houston time. The crew will come back out of Paulo will come back out of the habitation module where he will be for the photography operations, and they have to repeat some leak checks on the suits and on the hatch at that time. And then they will have their deorbit burn finally at 8:36 p.m. Houston time for a landing at 9:26 p.m. Houston time, southwest of Karaganda in Kazakhstan. So that's kind of the rundown. You may ask what the Endeavour crew is doing during all this time. They are scheduled to be asleep. We are not asking them to do anything differently than what they're scheduled for, but there are a couple of fairly lightly loaded days around that, so there is a possibility they'll get up. That's entirely discretionary. They don't need to. There's no requirement for that, and we're not going to ask them to. On board the station, Alexander and Andre will be awake with the ISS crew that are departing, and they'll be supporting them through the whole period. So they will be in communication for a good part of the undock and separation timeline. And that is all I have.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Kenny. We'll take questions here in Houston. We also have reporters on the phone bridge. So we'll start here. Phil?
Philip Sloss with NASASpaceflight.com. I guess this is for Courtney. Can you kind of contrast what would be a more sort of, seems like more of the straightforward normal undocking and SEP is that timeline, and what the crew has to do differently for this undocking and maneuvers?
Sure. There's two big differences. The first big difference is the timeline. The crew will actually be getting up about an hour and a half earlier. Maybe not quite an hour and a half. They're getting up earlier that day. The undocking is occurring an hour and a half earlier than it usually would. So normally we would undock on daily orbit 14, which is, which orbit, which pass, ground pass over Russia, for a landing 3 orbits later. On this one, they're getting up earlier so that they can undock 1 orbit earlier. To fit the operations into the timeline without perturbing any of the nominal descent operations. So that's the first big difference is the overall timeline. Second difference for this one is the attitudes were specifically designed to make sure that we've got good lighting for the imagery. We usually are not taking that into consideration. So, and in particular, Dmitry will be flying manually out to the station keeping point and then maintaining the station keeping point on manual pilot mode in the Soyuz. So we need to make sure he's got a good line of sight to the vehicle, but also good lighting and no sun in his eyes. So we made you saw the attitude was up a little bit so that they're coming above the V-bar behind the station a little bit, and that's so that when the sun is coming up, it's not right in his eyes as he's backing away. So that's another big difference. The operations themselves for the imagery, the window that they need to use to get the pictures out of is in the habitation module, which typically we seal up before departure, and then the crew doesn't go back into it after departure. And then, of course, the 2 modules separate, and the habitation module burns up in orbit. Meanwhile, the landing module is what brings them down to the ground. For this operation, they have to actually go back in to the habitation modules so that Paulo can take the pictures out of the window, and then they have to repeat the leak check. So he's got to go back into the landing module and make sure it's all sealed up tight again and get back in his close his suit up. He's going to have to take his gloves off to use the cameras.
Thank you.
Sure.
And for Mr. Todd, can you talk about, I mean, it seems like we heard that this was not going to happen, but then that was prior to this being a dual docked operations undocking. Can you talk about what happened, what transpired to bring this kind of back onto the table in the last few weeks?
Sure. As you might recall, originally this flight was supposed to fly several weeks ago. In that particular time frame, when it was going to fly several weeks ago, we had originally talked about asking the Russians to consider a flyabout when we were on our original date back in the middle of April time frame. At that time, when the Russians went and looked at their situation with their two Soyuz, they came back and said, well, maybe one of the things we might consider is just undocking 25S a little bit earlier. The issue that we had with doing that was that crew time between these two flights, these two shuttle flights, is very critical. And so opening up that amount of time when we're in what we call an indirect handover period, where we have one Soyuz crew come home, and we usually like to keep that time to somewhere around a couple of weeks. Having that actually get larger as a result of trying to share this objective, it was going to cause us to lose quite a bit of crew time while that Soyuz performed that documentation during the earlier launch window. So what happened here was the Russians came back and said that they were going to have to move their Russian 27 Soyuz launch. In order not to be in the same issue with losing the crew time, we all got together and agreed that it would be good if they went ahead and slid their 25S down period so that we can maintain that same spacing. Well, at the same time, we are also trying to negotiate with the shuttle program as they work through the issues that they were having and where they could get ready to go fly. And so it was kind of a serendipitous thing that everybody sort of ended up in a position where when the shuttle guys were ready to fly, we were trying to minimize this amount of downtime where we're at 3 crew. And where it ended up was, again, fortunate for all of us. And given that this particular vehicle, 25S, is an older series vehicle that didn't have the same challenges in terms of a new vehicle would, and trying not to overextend what you do with the new vehicle, our Russian colleagues felt much more comfortable in saying, hey, we're going to undock this vehicle anyway in this time period, and is it something you might want to consider for this flight? And so that's where we got to last week, and then we went and turned on the activity to try to do all the right analysis and see if we couldn't get it across the finish line, and this morning we did.
Mark.
Mark Carreau for Aviation Week, and I had 2 I think I can ask together. Who goes into the HAB module to do the photography? Is it just Paolo Nespoli, or are there others? And can you talk a little bit about the kind of photography, and I don't mean to be that technical, but is it still and video, or what is it you're sort of looking? And if you might explain the backdrop, do you have the Earth and the night sky or day sky, or the limb turning on? I'm not sure exactly what effects you're going for. Thank you.
Sure. I think the short answer to all of your questions is yes, except to the technical stuff. Paolo Nespoli is the only one who will be in the habitation module during this period. He will be doing three things. He'll be doing still photography. He'll be doing some video. He'll also be occasionally doing laser range finding to assist DEMA while he's doing the piloting. So he's got a couple different functions while he's in there. He'll be busy. In terms of the view and the lighting, since they're pitched up a little bit, we do expect to get a good view with the Earth in the background for much of this, which you should have been able to see also in the animation, and maybe we can show that one more time. That doesn't show any lighting in the animation, so it's kind of hard to tell, but we can certainly show it again if you'd like. And the technical specs, when we have talked about this photography or this imagery, since there's video also in the past, the goal really is to get some good archival imagery of the stack with the shuttle attached to it. So we're just looking for Paolo to use his best photographer, videographer skills while he's there, and he's certainly very experienced at that.
Get the mic over to Robert.
Hi, Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com with, I guess, 3 questions. First, how was Paolo selected, if there was a selection process of who would be the crew member to do the photography? Was it based on his photo skills, or was there a reason that he was able to get out of the seat easier?
It's actually more because he's got a couple of different jobs. Like I said, not only is he doing the imagery, but he also will be assisting DEMA with the range finding, with the laser range finder, and that's part of his training for where he sits in the Soyuz, for his role in the Soyuz.
And will the TMA-20 crew, will they need to go through any type of training, if not just to practice the logistics of Apollo getting out of a seat and entering the HAB module?
They have done some training already. In fact, that specific training they did last week. So they did do a check to make sure that that was going to work. They are doing some supplemental training. Today they had a session to get the cameras ready, talk about the camera settings and what to expect, and go through the procedure for what they were thinking in terms of where the cameras will be set up, and then what to do with them after they're done. The cameras will be staying in the habitation module, so they're going to essentially burn up on entry. They're not coming home. They also have another training session tomorrow to talk about the piloting specifically, and also the overall choreography of the event. For every Soyuz mission, we do a standard, essentially landing training session with all 3 crew members, and that was 2 days ago.
And lastly, you mentioned leak checks. If there was a problem in resealing the HAB module, would they have the option of coming back to the station at that point, or would they just stay in orbit until they fixed it, or how would that work?
We don't have the option to come back to the station with the orbiter there. That the analysis to support that hasn't been done. So we have not been counting on that in any of our discussions. We have made sure that we understand what the consumables situation is on Soyuz, how long it can sustain autonomous flight. There are several backup landing opportunities both on that day and on the following day. So we have, in the past, when we've seen issues with leak checks, they've been mainly with the suits, and those are usually easily fixed by the crew members. And so typically we've worked our way out of those. With this particular hatch, we have never had any significant issue with, and it's got redundant seals and is very robust. So while we are certainly thinking about what the contingency options would be, it's a pretty remote case that we're looking at.
Gina gets the mic.
Okay. Gina Sinceri, ABC News. How does the space station actually rotate? Is gyros, thrusters, Endeavour? How do you make that happen, and who will be in charge of that?
It's going to be the Russian segment thrusters. So from the service module and from Progress 42P, which is on the docking compartment.
Follow-up? Nope. Okay. We can go to the phone bridge now. We have 4 reporters on the phone bridge, starting off with Denise Chow from Space.com. Denise, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
For the Soyuz fly-around, when it was discussed for the 133 mission, there was talk about how there was a lot of engineering data that could be taken from the photos. Is that the same for this fly-around, or is this mostly just for a unique photo op?
Well, certainly, I think any time we get photo documentation of the station, there's there's sort of the gee whiz factor, just because of the enormity of it. Obviously, with having the shuttle attached, there's going to be even a greater heightened awareness and interest in seeing these photos. But you can rest assured there is a community here at the Johnson Space Center whose job it is to look at imagery that comes from the space station, and they take every opportunity they can to look at every picture that comes down. And so they'll have a unique opportunity here to get some photos from different angles. And so again, there'll certainly be some level of analysis, or at least scrutiny of these pictures from an engineering perspective.
Thanks, that's all for me.
Bill Harwood, CBS, next.
Yeah, guys, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. How do the video cards, I assume that's what they are, how do they get back to the States? And I mean, obviously we're not going to see this live, but how do they get back to the States, and when would the earliest be that we could expect to see this imagery?
Well, that part of the plan, Bill, is still something we're working with our Russian colleagues. We have to figure out how the handover happens of all the video cards, the photo cards. At this point, it's something we're working with the ground team over in Moscow, the folks who will be on site we will have people on site at the landing as well. And so we're trying to work an integrated plan that will allow those cards to be removed from the Soyuz. And then if everything works out okay, we'll make several copies there in and around the landing site or on the way back to Karaganda. And at that point, then we can start to process a distribution. And so our goal, hopefully within a day, we'd like to start seeing some of those photos and that video starting to make its way out into the airwaves.
Thanks. And for Courtney, you mentioned that a lot of study went into getting into that rather unique kind of sideways attitude. What are the issues in that that makes that something that required a lot of study? Thanks.
Well, any attitude that we go to that is essentially outside of the box, outside of the attitudes that we have fully analyzed, require a lot of scrutiny is a good word, to see really if there will be any problems, and if there will, where those problems will be and how great they will be. One of the other complicating factors about this timeline is the length of time that we're in each of these attitudes. It totals only one insulation pass, so half of an orbit, about 45 minutes, but that is still longer for being in one position for these unusual attitudes than what we're accustomed to needing to analyze. So it's really just, it's different enough from what we usually fly that it is outside of what we know about. So folks had to go off and really do the math and figure out where the problems would be. It's the same kind of problems we look for, so solar arrays are always a challenge, and thermal conditioning is always a challenge.
Thanks. And one more quick one from me for Kenny. You mentioned that the plan for getting the cards back is still in work. Is there some chance this stuff would end up in Moscow and would get released through some other way, or are you sure it's coming back, I guess, on Katie's plane to get back within a day or so? Thanks.
Okay. Well, again, at this point, we're working closely with the Russians, first of all, to make sure that we understand how the cards will be treated within the Soyuz amongst the crew themselves, and then we're working with the folks on the ground, both on the Russian side as well as our team that's going to be over there, to make sure that we have the assets and that we're ready and that we can get the handoff. And as far as whether they'll be released through Moscow or be back on the plane, our goal would be to try to get enough copies to ensure that we have multiple routes by which to get the video and the photography back to the States and released to all the different media outlets.
Okay, next up, James Dean from Florida Today.
Thank you very much. A few questions, if I may. First, I'm assuming that proceeding with this opportunity on this week means that there's no longer consideration of doing it for 135 when obviously you don't have that natural occurrence of an undocking.
At this point, we still have it in our requirement set as under consideration for the ULF-7 flight, the 135 flight. If we do get imagery off this flight, we'll certainly go back and look at whether or not that requirement still makes sense for that particular flight. There'll certainly be an additional degree of difficulty in that if we did it during the 135 flight, we'd have to go through the redocking exercise, and again, that's just brings a little more complexity to it that we would have to go work. So this clearly is a better option for us, and we'll see what the outcome looks like when we get the pictures back.
Thanks. This maneuver has been called under different scenarios a flyabout and a fly around, and I just wanted to confirm again. I guess I probably have to look at that video again to get a closer look. But the Soyuz it just backs away, or do you have a name for what this event is as it's currently designed? Could you just confirm if the Soyuz is actually doing anything different than a normal undocking scenario, or is there any flying that it needs to do to make this work?
There is certainly flying that is going to happen to make this work. What we've been kind of calling it as a team is the undock with imagery. For the most part, it looks exactly like a normal undock, except that the attitude is a little bit tweaked up to assist with the manual piloting so he doesn't get the sun in his eyes. But in terms of the overall sort of the relative motion of the Soyuz and the station, it looks just like an undocking. So we have been working hard to keep the words "fly around" and "fly about" out of our official terminology for this.
So, Rob, 2 more questions if there's time. When you're referring, Courtney, to the attitude, could you just explain that a little further? How, again, this attitude that you're going to need to get into differs from what you normally do during a Soyuz undock, or I guess even when a shuttle docks, the attitude is changed, right?
We for each vehicle docking, we try to take into account the trajectory of the approaching vehicle when we're planning where, how we want to orient the station for each vehicle docking and undocking. For the Soyuz vehicles, we undock them basically behind the station, so they go out the back of how the station is flying. What that means for the 2 Soyuz vehicles, which are docked, one on Zenith, one above, and one below on Nadir, is you have to aim that docking port backwards so that they're aimed back. Usually we put them right on the velocity vector when we're doing that. This time we're tipping it up a little bit so that they'll come above the vector behind the station. And that's really just, the sun is going to be coming up on the other side, and we just want to keep the sun out of the pilot's eyes, out of Dimitri's eyes.
Thanks again. And then lastly, Kenny, I just wondered if you could speak a little further to about just why so much work has been put in to make these photos possible. What will these photos mean to NASA, to the shuttle program, to the station program, to get these special views? Obviously, you get a lot of neat views on spacewalks or when a shuttle undocks, but what will you think will be so, I guess, inspiring or important about getting these particular pictures?
Sure. We talked a little bit about the engineering aspects of it earlier, and certainly there's some part of that will be there. There will be people that will look at these pictures with a different eye than probably those in the public will. But when you look at what this program has accomplished, this international partnership along with the Space Shuttle program, and you turn the clock forward and you look at the future generations, I'd like to think that they would look back on their history and look back at what we accomplished between these 2 very, very large programs and the technology and the engineering that went into to making the Space Shuttle do what it has done for this country, and then look at the International Space Station, what this international partnership has done, and look at these 2 programs represented in low Earth orbit together. I think, and I hope that when those future generations look back, that they see that it was quite a feat to go do this with the technology that we were dealing with in this particular time frame. And hopefully those pictures will show up in textbooks for years to come, in medical science books and physical science books, and in engineering textbooks, and it can be held up as a reason behind a lot of great discoveries. When I look at the International Space Station, I see it truly as a vessel of discovery. And to have the space shuttle attached, those guys are a part of everything that has been done in this program. And so if we're ever to end up in the future somewhere in a book, it'd be great to have the space shuttle represented there with us, as well as all the other international partners.
Okay, and I believe Jim Moberg is on from NBC.
Yeah. Hi there, guys. Courtney, was that, looking at the video, was that the moon coming up behind the station?
I'll have to go ask my pointer. I don't know. We were paying a whole lot more attention to what the station was doing than what the background was doing when we got that movie. That's a great question, though.
You guys work out the procedure. Question for Kenny. You're talking about the delay on 27S, which turned out to have been very convenient because of our delay. But it was delayed before we were delayed, and I'm wondering what kind of background you were getting from the Russian side as to the reasons that they had suddenly slipped their launch date about 8 days. The press reports in Moscow suggested it was that they were not yet finished working out anomalies on the first digital Soyuz flight.
To be perfectly frank, Jim, I didn't have that level of insight into what was going on with 27S, so from our perspective, we were looking to try to minimize that amount of time, and that's why we asked them to slide 25S. But their reasoning behind 27S, I just don't personally have that insight into.
Thank you very much, and things seem to have worked out pretty well for you.
And yeah, in the end, it looks like that this is going to be a great opportunity for the space flight community.
Okay, we're fine here. Thank you.
Okay, any follow-ups back here? Robert in the back.
Hi, Rob Perlman with CollectSpace.com again. With just two quick follow-ups. Is there anything that could happen between now and undocking that would cause you to not do this this imagery possibility?
From an open work standpoint, what we talked about this morning all seemed very benign. We're talking array angles and things that we typically look at relative to the 25S undock itself. It's typical Soyuz type of work that we close on after a go, no-go review, and we all agree that that's normal work and we go do. Certainly as they go through their preparations, the crew on board, if they see something, if they discover an issue with the vehicle, or just come back to us and say they're uncomfortable with something, then those are the kinds of things that would warrant further discussion. Courtney, I don't know if you have any other specifics.
I second both of those. I think we're in very good shape with what we know about the operation today, and what analysis has returned in, and what new knowledge we have because of it. Yeah, if there's something out there that the crew sees that we haven't seen yet or haven't talked about yet, that's certainly going to cause some more discussion and make us think about it again. And of course, this is a shuttle mission. There's a lot going on, and anything could happen. So we're keeping our eyes open to see what else might be out there. But right now, we don't know of any showstopper or potential showstopper that would turn this around.
And just out of just for curiosity's sake, the cameras that are going to burn up, were those extra cameras that were aboard the ISS or reached their end of life and were already going to be disposed of, or do they need to be replaced?
The two cameras specifically are Russian cameras, so I don't know if they were end of life. We have quite a few cameras on board, and actually both NASA and Russia had come up with candidate hardware items, and we had the specialists get together and talk about which items were being proposed on both sides and what made the most sense. And the two cameras that the Russians had made the most sense to use in this case. So on our side, yeah, same kind of thing. We're certainly not going to not use a camera that's on board and good. So it's hard to say a camera is at the end of its life. But these were available and willing to give them up if we can get these photos. So.
Okay, that wraps up the questions. A few programming notes. First of all, we'll replay that animation right at the end of this briefing. It'll also be on our website with Courtney's comments as she narrated through the animation of the undocking and the imagery acquisition exercise. Coming up at 2 p.m. Central Time this afternoon, this is 1 hour earlier than previously scheduled, today's Mission Management Team briefing with Leroy Kane, the chair of the Mission Management Team and the Deputy Shuttle Program Manager, 1 hour earlier than previously scheduled at 2 p.m. Central Time today. Our flight day highlights will now follow that briefing at 3 p.m. Central Time. The Space Shuttle crew wakes up tonight at 8:26 p.m. Central Time to begin its flight day. One highlight on the crew's schedule for early Saturday is a special call from the Vatican in Rome from His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI. The Holy Father's call to the crew is scheduled on Saturday at 6:11 a.m. Central Time, 7:11 a.m. Eastern Time. You'll see both sides of that call on NASA television. It will be in English and in Italian. Now, getting back to Soyuz for a second, the change of command ceremony between the crews is scheduled on Sunday at 10:42 a.m. Central Time. The off-going station commander, Dmitry Kondratyev, will hand over command of the station to Andrei Bodosenko at that time, Sunday at 10:42 a.m. Central Time. And then on homecoming day for the Expedition 27 trio, our coverage is integrated into the STS-135 ULF-6 mission coverage. Monday at 1 p.m., farewells and hatch closure. That's the beginning of our coverage. 4:15 p.m., the second phase of the coverage for undocking and the imagery acquisition exercise. And then later in the evening, 8:15 p.m. Central Time, deorbit burn and landing coverage, and we, as always, hope to have live television from the landing site southeast of Zhezkazgan in Kazakhstan. You'll see all of that and our continuing mission coverage on the website as well as NASA television, www.nasa.gov, one-stop shopping for everything in human spaceflight. So with that, we'll go back to mission coverage, and we'll see you later, 2 o'clock, for the mission management team briefing. Thanks very much.